ready to achieve great heights? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to Power Your Performance, the podcast where we dive deep with leaders in the gaming world and beyond and learn the techniques they use to power their lives. I am your host, Gary Kleinman. Allie Brekke, welcome to Power Your Performance.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited. I know a little bit about your story. You are a female gamer for a very, 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 very long time, but not that long because you're still young with a 12 or 13-year-old, I believe?
14.
14. Got older in the last few days. And a community manager, and you're going to tell us all about it. And there's some specific things I want to get into as a female in gaming and the trolling and the behaviors and what have you, and how you handle that. So the best place to start is generally at the beginning. How'd you get into gaming?
I got into gaming. It started off with, I had some older cousins who they were probably 5-6 years older than I was. And it was on an SNES. And, I was the only girl. And so I would get brought along to family functions and most of the kids would get shuffled off to the room so the adults could do what they were going to do. And, they eventually got tired of me whining about, well, I want to turn. So they wound up letting me play, and it has snowballed pretty progressively for the next 28, 29 years.
Were they receptive to a girl playing with them, even though you were a cousin?
Yeah.
Did they give you a hard time?
At first they did.
And then you beat them, and that changed everything?
It was something where they were still a little, my eldest cousin, he was like, oh, okay, because they were worried I was going to cry or I was going to ruin, the game or something. And my oldest cousin realized, okay, she's got it, it's fine. And then when the N64 hit, GoldenEye and, oh gosh, what was that one? I can't remember. Gauntlet Legends. Okay. When we were playing against each other or with each other, all of a sudden the attitude changed because GoldenEye, to this day, I'll still play emulations of it. It's my childhood. And I was beating my teenage cousins.
How old were you about this time?
GoldenEye, I want to say 10.
Okay.
I'm terrible with ages.
No, it's okay. and then I know there was a period of time in your childhood that was a little bit difficult. And
yes.
Without getting into as deep as you want to get or not, but I think what's powerful is how gaming helped you. So I know somewhere in your childhood you ended up in the foster system. In what state?
Illinois.
Okay. How'd that happen? I mean, and then we'll go into the kind of sort of savior aspect of it.
I'd had a very volatile childhood. My father was an addict and a convicted felon several times over. And my family just sort of turned a blind eye to it. All the extended family, they knew what he did. They knew how angry and violent he was. And it was just, if they pretended it didn't happen, then, they could keep living that lie. And when I was about 10, there was an incident that rose to the occasion of I was removed from the home. And when the family was kind of questioned, how did you not know this was happening? Where I was showing up with fractures that weren't set properly. I was showing up clearly, you can see bruises, you can see cuts, you can see scrapes, you can see black eyes. And it was, how are you turning a blind eye to all of this? And there was no really good answer. And it was just easier for them to say, we can't take her in. They took my younger brother in, which my younger brother, he was kind of the golden child. He was the planned baby. I was unplanned.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, my heart breaks for you to have that in your childhood and the impact of it, and how I know when you got to the foster facility or the home that there was a gaming device.
Yes.
And you immediately took to it?
Yes, there was the original Xbox, and it was, at the time going into that home, it wasn't the greatest place, but at the same time, I was removed from a situation that all I'd known was volatility. And the one thing that kind of carried over was the one thing that I could remember made me happy, and that was gaming. And there were a couple of other kids in the house, and it was the original old school Xbox and Halo 1.
Oh.
And I dove right in because it started off as an escape.
So you think that's where the power came from, if you will, or the joy was the virtual world that you could live in and create your own virtual world?
I think so. I think a lot of it came in because there was, the court case and the different interviews. And then, there's when you get injured severely and it's not taken care of, it's a process to set bones that need to be properly set that haven't been for years. And it was just, I was miserable.
I'm so sorry.
For those, half an hour, whatever they let me play, I wasn't, myself. I was Master Chief. I wasn't in a home that in the back of your mind, it's not my home. This isn't my family. And you just kind of feel like you're this lost dog. Just kind of, you have no idea where you really are in the world. And
you were young.
Yeah. And it was kind of like a security blanket where I could control the situation. I didn't have people judging me, because even at 10 and 11 and 12, the defense lawyer's job is to cross-examine you, and it is to, as horrendous as it is to do to a child, it's their job to make you seem like you're making it up. And I remember there was a particularly bad court date, and I didn't speak for like 3 days after it. But I played Halo because, nobody, in my mind, it's as a kid, not realizing what the correlation was. No one could stop me as Master Chief. Or if I messed up, it's okay, you start over. Right.
I mean, it's interesting. There are quite a lot of studies about the use of gaming in the treatment of PTSD. And it almost sounds like you self-medicated or self-treated with gaming at an early age because it gave you the power to kind of control your environment.
Absolutely. Because it was even branching out into other games then. It was still like Halo, it holds a special place in my heart. I think it was because that was what got me through the worst of the worst.
So you think some of the reasons you still game is that it goes back to such trauma, but it allowed you to escape that trauma, and it's so ingrained from a positive perspective that you've continued to game. And we'll get into you building a community because I think that may well be an outgrowth of that as well.
Yes. I do. I think because I still to this day, if I've had a really, really bad day or we had a death in the family not that long ago, and I found myself just, knee deep in an MMO where it was, even at, being a full grown adult, it's being able to create a world or be in a world where everything around you, it's not so much, I don't control everything around me, but I know that it's safe. And there's also like a social aspect with that, because going into foster care, everyone judges you, especially if you have to move schools or something. The moment kids hear that you're a foster kid, at least back
you're labeled, right?
Yeah, you're labeled.
Having had some personal involvement with from close friends in that system, it's very labeling. It's very traumatic. It's very fracturing and what have you. So tell me about the community aspect when you first started feeling a sense of others through your gaming.
There was, I want to say it was 6th or 7th grade. There was a gaming club at school. And there were a bunch of people with Xboxes. You'd get together, what we call LAN events now.
Yep, of course.
We would all hang out and we'd play, Halo 2 specifically, because that was the big multiplayer, everyone's having fun. And just other games. And it was the first time where the only sort of, I won't say judgment, but there was definitely a bit of a barrier because I was a girl. I was one of 2 girls in a group of 20.
Wow.
So it was still very girls don't play video games, which, I mean, we all know is not true now.
Well, but it's interesting you say you're 100% right. The statistics are it's almost split 50-50 male-female. The average age of a gamer is 37. That encompasses everything from Candy Crush to Call of Duty and what have you. But in that core of hardcore gaming, you don't see that many females. So when you're going back that many years, did you feel a lack of acceptance except for the other girl?
Yeah, it was. And it shaped how, working in esports now, I've realized how it shaped me. My first instinct is to, stop the insults before they begin if it comes to you're not a real gamer. Because I had to prove myself to those boys, and it was the only way they would stop with the girls don't play video games. It took beating them all individually for it to stop.
Well, that is the great equalizer in all sport, yes. Right? If you play tennis with a female, and I go back to my high school days a short time ago. And my then girlfriend was on the high school tennis team. I didn't even want to play a set with her because there was no way. And there is some credibility that she got just as a result of her athletic ability. And I am sure gaming was the same way. So before we get into the esports and where you are today, you grow up through that system. You obviously ultimately leave that system and you continue to game.
Yes.
And you did that, at some point professionally, and you started as a community manager. Is that correct?
I started actually just streaming with some friends who did some QA testing and some beta testing on a video game franchise. And they were doing community streams where the actual community manager from Ubisoft was doing them. And I had friends say, hey, Justin's playing Unity on Twitch. Go join him. And it was like, okay. Where it was like, you don't have to twist my arm to play one of my favorite games. So we went in and it clicked. And there was that sort of community that I hadn't really gotten into the community based around a singular video game before. It was always just people around me, so Twitch was this entirely new environment of these micro communities everywhere. And I wound up streaming for a little bit, and then I went into community management with individual streamers. And then from there, it went to community managing a couple different brands, and then esports.
So the community manager, gaming, and I always find it interesting when people speak about or talk about esports and gaming as a single unified activity. Like baseball, wherever baseball is played, is 9 innings, the same positions, the same batting order, relief pitchers, the whole thing. But gaming's not that. Esports is basically a conglomeration of multiple different titles and multiple different genres. Did you find that when you are managing community, that you're managing community within a title and a genre as opposed to a bunch of people that just game?
Yes, there were definitely different ways that you had to handle each community, because the org that I started with, they had a professional Halo team, a professional Gears of War team, and a professional World of Warcraft team. And each community was handled differently, because how the WoW fans behave and how even the way they speak, like it's almost like going to England and there's so many different dialects. And with esports, it's kind of the same way with how you have to approach and talk to these different communities. And
did the toxicity that you experienced growing up, impact the standards that you created for the community and the behavior patterns?
Absolutely.
So how do you communicate that as a community manager? How do you communicate to that community within a specific title that bad behavior on any level, whatever that level is, or whatever that bad behavior is just not tolerated?
Well, I actually got very fortunate signing with GoSu first because me coming in, it didn't change their rules in terms of how absolutely no sexism, no racism, no bigotry of any kind. Everyone is here to game. We're not judging. We're not going to start attacking, people, that type of thing. They were very, very clear about that with their entire community. The first real instance that happened, it was my first tournament working as their community manager, and our Gears of War team was competing. And someone in the Twitch chat had recognized my name as GoSu's community manager. And we were playing against another org at the time, and their fans picked up on that. And I closed my Twitter DMs and made my account private for about a week after. I received a little over 100 just obscene messages where it was, unwanted photos of, I'll let you imagine.
Yeah.
Death threats, rape threats, threats against my kids, threats against that was going to be doxxed. And
I mean, that's just crazy. It's just so hard, sitting here having this conversation with you and actually believing that this is going on. And is that going on, do you think, because in those conversations, people can be anonymous? They've got a handle.
Absolutely.
And their picture's not there. Nobody can really call them on it.
Absolutely. Because I can tell you, I have been how people behave towards me online versus how they behave if I go to an event in person. Completely different. I mean, and this is even, I can tell you people that I've dealt with online and then dealt with in person.
Yeah, well, of course. If somebody's going to do it in person, I mean, it's incredibly confrontational and aggressive. And then there are other people there, hopefully, to intervene. So how do you stop that online? I mean, is there a way you think to verify people and their and the name that they're using, their handle that they're using, so that it can be stopped? I mean, this has been an issue for quite some time. We talked about it a couple of days ago. Somebody that I know that was really trolled with some pretty significant anti-Semitism online to the point that she closed down her stream. And when I spoke to her, I said, as we discussed, the worst thing you can do is close it down, get up and stream more. But as a community manager, who sets those rules? How do you create consequences, and who's there to enforce them?
I think from a Twitch perspective, because I think that might be the easiest, because otherwise, it's bringing in people, how I manage an organization versus, a Twitch stream. They're a little different because one is a business. Not that Twitch streams aren't, shouldn't be treated as businesses. However, I have, contracts that everyone in particularly the player community signs, whereas you don't get that on a Twitch stream. There's a couple different steps that you can take with a Twitch stream that, first and foremost, and this is something as someone who was a professional moderator for a while, have good moderators. Make sure they understand that they are the first line of defense, because Twitch has something called an auto mod feature. It's not going to catch everything. People actively spend time trying to find ways around it.
Of course.
How to make you say,
kind of like ad blockers. Right? Yeah.
And having to go through that process, moderators are much more important than a lot of people give them credit for. Because I can tell you, I've moderated front page streams before where you're looking at 30, 40,000 people in the room.
And so you have 30,000 people in the room. It's virtually impossible to control bad conduct.
Yes and no. You have enough moderators for the incoming content. You can turn on slow mode, so people can't be spamming. You really heighten the auto mod features, but you're right. There will always be a crack for something to slip through. or you look at people who make obscene usernames that pop up on stream when you have the alerts going saying, X just followed.
Yeah, and listen, I think it's like anything else. We're never going to eradicate 100% of the bad behavior, and that's just representative of society. But we can start eradicating larger and larger chunks. Yes. Do you see it getting better?
Sadly, no. Hate raids are still happening on Twitch. And this isn't, I don't want to turn this into a soapbox of streaming platforms need to do more, but they do. Twitch really needs to step its game up when they have someone who the same IP address is creating 100 to 1,000 accounts over the course of 2 days. That should be a flag. They should all be flagged. You have creators who, Black creators, queer creators, anyone who is identified as, quote unquote, different, being attacked simply for existing on the platform. And, I'm not naive to think that they can do it in the snap of a finger, but at the same time, user safety needs to be a bit more front and center.
Yeah, I've always been surprised, and I say this almost every session I have Empower Your Performance, that gaming for so many years, and still to a certain extent, is kind of an activity that's a cry for help, that people think it's just antisocial kids sitting in the corner with acne scars playing and not doing anything. And I've always just amazed me that the publishers, and certainly the larger publishers, don't do public service announcements of all the good that comes from gaming, the community building, the good social relationships, the fact that I think there's a large percentage of city managers that became city managers because of SimCity. And, the Notre Dame Cathedral is being rebuilt partly from Assassin's Creed's kind of digital blueprint. I mean, that's all really positive stuff. And I'm always surprised that those that have the voice and the control don't share it. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time just bashing that and saying, I'm sad to hear that it still continues, but your story is equally as powerful. So when did you get into esports, from the community manager streaming perspective? What made you make that shift, and when?
I want to say it was 2015 when I started working in esports. And it was just, I'd had a bad experience with I was working with gaming centric brands, particularly energy drinks. And I had seen kind of the underbelly of these gaming startups and how they treated the affiliate program. And I didn't want to deal with it. And I'd been a fan of professional Halo for a while. And I had a friend who used to work at the company that I had just left. And he was like, listen, they need a community manager. Why don't you, talk to them, see how it goes. And I was hired about 15 minutes into the call. So that just, I started there, and it has.
I would hire you 15 minutes into a call as well. So
well, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, and when was that?
2015.
Oh, okay. It's not that long ago. And so you're still today community managing.
Actually, I am the director of operations for my current org.
And they compete in how many different titles? I always forget.
Currently, AWC, which is WoW. We have Apex. Our last ALGS series, we were the champions. And then we have our own host of Fortnite pros. We have roughly about $2 million in earnings over the last 2 years.
That's fantastic. So as you manage some of the operations and the professional athletes, and there are a couple of things I want to get in before our time runs out, because conversations like this go all too fast. Is there training for the professional athletes before they're playing about their conduct and the consequences? Is it part of the organization manual to impose upon the individual players the appropriate etiquette and respect and choice of language?
Yes, to a point. We have a discussion with them. There is a code of conduct clause in at least our contracts, because, it's the joke that everyone calls me mom, because I do. It's like babysitting, because a lot of the people all of them, I think all of our pro players are younger than me. some are in their teens. And there is the conversation of, listen, I understand you may get frustrated. You represent our org. You don't need to behave. You need to carry yourself with a little bit more respect.
You hear of large corporations have diversity training, right? Discrimination training. It would be interesting if there was a formal program in gaming and esports, certainly esports, because you can put that as a clause in a contract, to have a formal training program for staff, players, and what have you about those standards of conduct.
It's something where I'm at now. Fortunately, we have, our identities, our sexual identities, our genders, religion, all of it. We're all across the board. So it's something where we work with a mutual respect, because everyone comes from different backgrounds, different races. And there's it's something where when people are posting about holidays, it's always if you celebrate, which is the first place I've seen that. Or if you're celebrating today, like Easter, right. It was if you celebrate, happy Easter.
Right. Okay. That's
so
great.
It's been something that, at least with our staff, has been amazing, because we all, everyone literally, it runs the gamut, and it's something I've never worked anywhere as diverse as here. So
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. So as time runs out, I have one last question for you. Based upon the hierarchy, or the arc of your experience from the foster care to where you are now, what's your advice to somebody similar to where you were that is being trolled, or it's on the wrong end of bad behavior, words, conduct, or otherwise? What do you want to say to them today to help them? Because you obviously have come through it well. What do you say to them?
I think, it's a bit of a cliche that it gets better. But it's hard to understand this, especially if they're where I was, but you're not alone. I promise you, especially now, because, when I was growing up, the internet wasn't as prevalent. You can find people who share your interests. You can find people who, play the right games. There are, Twitch specifically, there are so many people who all they want to do is foster a good community and create a space where everyone is welcome, everyone can relax and just be themselves. And, unfortunately, with what you go through, you may have to look a little bit more hard, or, you have to look harder than anyone else, but it's worth it, because I can tell you, I struggle socially. Like in person, I'm horrible. And it's something where
I find that hard to believe, but I'll take your word for it.
It's online. You have that buffer where if I'm really uncomfortable, I can shut the computer off.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Allie, thank you. We try to keep this at 30, so you've got other things to do. My heart breaks for the story and the life that you had to get through and win, which is fantastic. Thank you for your strength, your power, and your continuation in making the world safe for everybody in and out of gaming. And we'll have a follow-up session and see if the world of gaming changes.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Allie, be well, stay healthy. Thanks again for your time. Thanks for listening. This podcast is part of the MAP Esports Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Please be sure to leave us a review and follow us on your favorite podcast player.